At 70 years old, I stood at the entrance of my beach house on Seabrook Island, the keys trembling in my hand. My name is Norma Reynolds, and for 20 years this cottage by the ocean had been my sanctuary. But that morning I found strangers on my porch and laughter echoing from rooms that should have been silent. Brooke, my daughter-in-law, leaned over the railing as if she owned the place. "There's no room for you here," she shouted, her tone sharp enough to slice through the salt air. Behind her, teenagers kicked a ball against my flower pots, and Brooke's mother wore one of my robes, as if it were her own. Every detail of the scene told me I had been replaced in my own home. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg. I simply held the keys tighter. At that moment, I knew this fight would not be won with shouting on the porch. It would be decided in court, where truth leaves no room for arrogance. I was 50 years old when I first stood on this stretch of sand, with nothing more than a dream and a widow's pension. My husband had passed suddenly, and I was left to raise our son while stitching clothes late into the night. Every dress I hemmed, every suit I repaired, every prom gown I tailored carried me one step closer to this house. The cottage I named Sandpiper House was never just walls and windows. It was a promise to myself that I could survive even after life tried to break me. Each tile on the roof, each brick in the fireplace, every rosemary plant by the steps came from my own hard work. I still remember selling handmade quilts at the market just to afford the kitchen counters, or hemming 6 prom dresses in one weekend to make a mortgage payment. This place was built with sacrifice and persistence. It held the proof of my independence, my survival, and my hope that family would always have a safe place to gather. That morning, standing at its gate, I realized my son's wife saw none of that history, only a property she believed was hers to claim. When I turned into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was the unfamiliar cars parked in my garage as if it were a public lot. Empty bottles and red plastic cups dotted the azalea bushes I had trimmed with such care. The music thumped from inside, drowning out the natural rhythm of the waves that had always been my comfort. On the terrace, teenagers I didn't recognize kicked a soccer ball into my potted geraniums. My wicker chairs were draped with wet towels and stained clothes. Every corner screamed of intrusion. Then Brooke appeared in the doorway, standing tall as if she were the rightful owner. Beside her was her sister Tessa, phone in hand, recording everything as though my humiliation were an entertaining story for her friends. Elaine, Brooke's mother, strolled past wearing one of my robes, sipping coffee with a smirk that dared me to challenge her. "Robert told us we could use the house whenever we wanted," Brooke said casually, as though permission from my son erased decades of labor and sacrifice. She crossed her arms, adding with a sharp laugh, "What's his is mine, and what's yours is his. That's how family works." Her words cut deeper than the broken planters. They weren't here by accident. This was entitlement dressed up as family, and they wanted me to believe I no longer had a place in the home I had built. But deep inside, I felt something rising, an anger steadier than fear, an anger that knew this battle would not end on their terms. One of Tessa's boys, no more than 16, stopped dribbling his ball and looked me over with a smirk. "Why don't you just get a hotel?" he said, as if sending me away were the most natural thing in the world. His casual cruelty stung more than he realized. I glanced around the terrace. Elaine leaned back in my chair, her eyes half-lidded with disdain. Tessa whispered into her phone, no doubt telling her friends about the spectacle. Brooke's triumphant smile widened, convinced she had finally claimed the upper hand. Every eye on that porch waited for me to fight, to scream, to plead for what was mine. But I refused to give them the satisfaction. I slipped my keys back into my purse, straightened my shoulders, and forced a calm smile. "Enjoy yourselves," I said softly. My voice carried more weight than any shout. As I walked back to my car, I felt the heat of their laughter behind me. Each step was heavy with humiliation, but it was also steady with purpose. Pride is loud. Dignity whispers. And dignity guided me away from that house, across the gravel drive, and down the coastal road to a hotel where I would spend the night. What they mistook as defeat was, in truth, the beginning of my strategy. That night, I sat alone on the balcony of the Seabrook Inn, staring at the faint lights of Sandpiper House in the distance. The ocean breeze carried no comfort, only the bitter reminder that my sanctuary was filled with people who mocked me. Humiliation could have broken me, but it didn't. Instead, it sharpened me. I pulled out a notebook from my bag and began to write. First, a list of documents I needed to gather: the deed, receipts, insurance records. Then, a reminder to visit the bank, to lock down my accounts and prove my competence. Finally, the name of an attorney, If Brooke wanted a war cloaked in family ties, I would meet her with the clarity of law. I thought of the thousands of seams I had sewn, each one pulled tight to mend something torn. This was no different. A stitch at a time, I would close the wound they tried to open in my life. And when the final knot was tied, they would learn Norma Reynolds was no one's victim. At dawn, I returned to Sandpiper House. I hoped that maybe, after a night's rest, things would look different. Instead, they looked worse. The front door was locked. My own door. When Tessa finally opened it, she rolled her eyes and muttered, "What do you want now?" Inside, the air smelled of smoke, cheap perfume, and spoiled food. My carefully kept living room was littered with inflatable mattresses and heaps of clothes. I climbed the stairs to retrieve a few personal things, but what I found left me cold. Elaine stood in my bedroom closet, folding my dresses into trash bags as if they were donations. Two boys I didn't know were sprawled across my bed, using my pillows as if they were theirs. I pushed past the chaos and went to the hidden panel only I knew about. My heart sank. The secret closet had been rifled through. My jewelry was gone. The deed lay crumpled on the floor. Among the mess, I noticed papers that didn't belong to me, legal documents typed and stamped with frightening precision. They were petitions to transfer the title of Sandpiper House to my son, Daniel Reynolds, claiming that due to my advanced age and deteriorating mental state, I was no longer capable of managing property. A note in Brooke's handwriting scrawled across the top, once signed, "We can sell and upgrade. R just has to cooperate." My hands shook, but not from fear. They shook with anger. This wasn't carelessness. It wasn't an accident. It was a plan, calculated, deliberate, and signed with betrayal. On Monday morning, I drove straight to the bank. For 20 years I had trusted Mr. Luis Alvarez, the manager, with every deposit and every question. He greeted me with his usual kindness, but when I asked for a private room, his smile faded. "I need a full statement of my accounts," I said firmly, "and I need confirmation, in writing, that I am fully capable of managing them myself." He pulled up the records, and for the first time in days I felt a flicker of relief. My discipline had not failed me. $87,000 in savings, $23,000 in certificates of deposit, and $12,000 in checking. $122,000 in total money Brooke and Daniel had no idea existed. Mr. Alvarez leaned forward. "Norma, do you need legal help?" "Yes," I replied. "My family is trying to have me declared incompetent." He nodded gravely. "Then let me give you the name of someone I trust." I left the bank with two things: a letter confirming my sound mind and the name of attorney Colton Pierce. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had more than anger. I had ammunition. That afternoon I sat in the office of attorney Colton Pierce, a man with silver at his temples and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened quietly as I told him everything from Brooke's insults on the porch to the discovery of forged documents upstairs. When I finished, he tapped his pen once against his legal pad. "Miss Reynolds," he said, "this is not just a family quarrel. This is fraud. Here is what we will do. First, we file an emergency eviction for illegal occupation. Second, we report the stolen jewelry to the police. Third, we notify the medical board about the falsified dementia report. And fourth, we pursue charges of property fraud and forgery against anyone involved." I nodded. "How much time will this take?" "The eviction could be immediate," he replied. "The rest will follow in court. My fee is $5,000. Can you manage that?" I opened my purse and placed the checkbook on his desk. "I'll pay it in full today." For a moment, his professional demeanor softened. "You're serious about this?" "Love can survive distance," I said, meeting his gaze. "But it cannot survive theft." He set down his pen. "Then we fight all the way. Just know this will strain whatever relationship you still have with your son." I thought of Daniel, of the boy I had once carried on my hip, and of the man who now signed papers to erase me. If money means more to him than his mother, then there was no relationship left to save. 2 mornings later, I returned to Sandpiper House, not alone this time, but with attorney Pierce, a uniformed officer, and a notary public. We arrived just after sunrise. The tide was low, the air still heavy with salt, and for the first time in days I felt the ground under my feet steady. Brooke and her family were eating breakfast on the terrace, plates piled high as though they were on vacation. When they saw the police cruiser roll into the drive, Brooke's fork clattered onto her plate. "Good morning," Pierce announced firmly. "I am Colton Pierce, legal representative of Mrs. Norma Reynolds. the rightful owner of this property. We are here to deliver an immediate eviction order for unlawful occupation." The officer read the charges: trespass, destruction of property, theft. Elaine went pale. Tessa lowered her phone, suddenly unwilling to film. Brooke tried to laugh, but the sound cracked in her throat. "You have exactly 2 hours to gather your personal belongings and leave," the officer continued. "Anything belonging to Mrs. Reynolds must remain." That was when Daniel pulled up, his car screeching against the gravel. He rushed onto the porch, eyes wide. "Mom, what's happening?" "What's happening," I said, holding up the crumpled transfer petition, "is that your wife tried to steal my house with forged papers. And you signed them." Daniel stammered. Brooke hissed in his ear, urging him to stay quiet. Pierce stepped forward. "Any further insults about Mrs. Reynolds' age will be documented as additional evidence of abuse." The clock started ticking. 2 hours. Boxes flew open, shouts filled the air, and what they had built on arrogance began to crumble under the weight of the law. By the end of that chaotic morning, Sandpiper House was mine again, but it did not look like the sanctuary I had built. The officer and notary left, leaving me to walk through the rooms in silence. What I saw broke my heart more than the shouting ever could. In the kitchen, my best skillets were ruined with blackened stains that would never wash away. The porcelain tub upstairs bore a deep dye mark, as if someone had spilled hair color and never bothered to clean it. My embroidered cushions were stained with red wine, and the rosemary plants I had tended by the steps were trampled flat into the dirt. But the worst loss was not metal or fabric. My family photo album was gone, the one with Daniel's childhood birthdays and pictures of my late husband on this very shore. Alongside it, the old wall clock my father had given me as a wedding gift had disappeared too. Those things could never be replaced. Money could fix the house, but nothing could stitch back memories stolen by careless hands. A week later, Attorney Pierce called with news that shifted everything. "Norma," he said, "the medical board has suspended Dr. Neil Porter. Turns out he signed more than a dozen false dementia reports in exchange for cash. Yours was just one of them." I sat back in my chair, stunned. How many other families had tried to strip their elders of property with the stroke of his dishonest pen? "And there's more," Pierce continued. "The district attorney has decided to pursue criminal charges: conspiracy and property fraud. This is no longer just civil. If they're found guilty, they could face probation, fines, even jail time." I let the words settle. I had never wanted my son in handcuffs, but I could not protect him from consequences he had chosen for himself. Meanwhile, Brooke and Daniel's legal fees mounted. Every week they paid another attorney's bill, draining money they didn't have. What began as a plot to gain more had turned into a hole they could not stop digging. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt justice taking shape, not revenge justice. In the end, Brooke and Daniel accepted a plea bargain. They avoided prison, but the price was steep: a $25,000 fine, 200 hours of community service each, and a permanent criminal record that would shadow them for years. I did not celebrate, I did not gloat. Instead, I changed the locks on Sandpiper House, installed new security cameras, and updated my will. If Daniel wanted independence so badly, he would have it. The cottage would no longer pass to him. Instead, I named a local charity as the future beneficiary. I also hired a part-time caretaker, a woman named Maria who came 3 days a week to keep the house in order. It was not that I couldn't do it myself, but after what happened, I wanted to ensure no one could step inside my home without my knowledge. These choices were not made out of bitterness. They were boundaries, carefully drawn lines that kept me safe, respected, and in control of what was mine. Not long after, I joined a senior support group at the community center in Charleston. To my surprise, I was not alone. Story after story echoed: my own parents tricked out of homes, grandparents swindled by their children, widows left penniless after signing documents they barely understood. I began to share what had happened to me, not as a tale of bitterness but as a lesson. I explained how to safeguard property deeds, why keeping financial records organized mattered, and how even a simple letter from a bank could defend against lies. 2 women in particular stayed with me. One, Dolores, discovered her son had sold her house while she was recovering in the hospital. Another, Carmen, told us her children emptied her bank account during her cancer treatments. Their pain reminded me that mine was part of a larger fight. So I volunteered for a hotline supporting elderly victims of family abuse. Each call I answered, each voice I reassured, gave new meaning to my ordeal. Pain had turned into purpose. Months later, Daniel appeared at Sandpiper House alone. He looked thinner, his eyes lined with years I knew he hadn't yet lived. He stood at the edge of the porch, hesitant, as though asking permission to come closer. "Mom," he said quietly, "I came to ask for forgiveness. Not for money, not for help, just forgiveness. I understand now what I did. I betrayed you, and there's no excuse." I listened without answering. Forgiveness is not something handed out like spare change. It takes time, and it takes truth. Eventually, I allowed the children to visit. Their laughter filled the house in a way nothing else could. One Sunday, my granddaughter Sophia knelt beside me in the garden and asked, "Grandma, why did you and Dad fight so badly?" I told her gently, "Sometimes adults make mistakes. Your father made some with me, and it hurt. But mistakes don't erase love. They just remind us to protect it more carefully." Her young eyes studied me, wiser than her years. "So it's like when I take my sister's things without asking?" "Yes, dear," I smiled. "Exactly like that." At 70, I learned a truth I wish I had known sooner. Age is not fragility. Age is proof that you have stood up more times than you have fallen, that you have chosen dignity when the world tried to strip it away. Sandpiper House still stands on Seabrook Island, strong against the tide. It carries the story of sacrifice, betrayal, and finally resilience. My son may have lost his way, but I did not lose mine. I chose to protect what was rightfully mine, and in doing so, I discovered the strength to help others protect theirs. If you are listening to my story, remember this: family should never mean surrendering your dignity. And if someone tries to take what you've built, stand tall, gather your evidence, seek help, and fight with truth as your weapon. If this story speaks to you, like this video so others may find it, share it with a friend, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments.